around. I have been doing this work for over 8 years now. I've been sober for over 8 years. Thank you. I'm united with my family, my children, and I work for Ceasefire, but like I said, I do a lot of I've literally dedicated my life. This is my life. So it's a great honor to me to meet with these guys and girls. I mean, it's just like, I'm so honored because they're so amazing, right? So let's give them another hand. They can introduce themselves, so this can be informal, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty informal, but I am Delaney Tarr. I'm a co-founder of the March for Our Lives, and I was I was a student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on the date of February 14th when a gunman shot down 17 of my peers. And since then, I've been mobilized in working to make sure that nobody has to have that same experience, and nobody has to experience gun violence in the way that we did.
Hi, my name is Sarah Chadwick. I'm currently a senior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I'll be graduating this year. I'm also a co-founder of March for Our Lives. And as Delaney said, I'm here, and I was in March for Our Lives, or I am in March for Our Lives, to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other community, because to be honest, March for Our Lives shouldn't even have to be a thing.
Hello, I graduated from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in the year of 2016, and on February 14th I lost my best friend Joaquin Oliver due to the tragedy at my alma mater, and I just knew that at the time I was designing T-shirts and working with Joaquin on a project that that's been very dear to my heart for a while. And after the shooting, I just knew that I wanted to dedicate my creative abilities and just anything that I had to this movement. And right now I stand in as the creative director for March for Our Lives. And I don't know if you guys have seen, these nifty QR code T-shirts. I mean, you look at it, you think it's an American flag, but as some of you may know, or for those who don't, if you scan this T-shirt with your smartphone, it registers you to vote in under 2 minutes. And then now with most registration deadlines, this shirt also shows you where the closest polling place is if you scan it with our phone through our March for Our Lives website. So I think it's ideas like this that have helped our movement, always act forward thinking. And I think this is the energy that we need to continue to use if we're going to solve the senseless gun violence in this country and around the world.
Thank you. Clearly, you guys have given a fresh, energy to a very old problem, right, that should have been solved long ago. I want to start the questions with just this brief question. Before this horrific tragedy happened to you and your students and the people you lost, what was your view of your future before this happened?
I mean, don't get me wrong, before all this happened, I cared about politics, and I knew that I needed to make sure that my future was going to be better. But the way that I was planning on doing that, and the way that oftentimes I still do plan on doing that, was as a journalist. I find that the media has the power of being the watchdog of democracy, and I really wanted to ensure that I could be a part of that I could be somebody that would hold elected officials accountable in my own way, through publishing these articles, through raising voices, through raising stories in a way that can really just shine some light on all of these different issues in our country. And I mean, to this day, I'm still just as passionate about journalism. That hasn't changed. It's just, I've gotten a much deeper connection to it.
As for me, I was 16 when it happened. I'm 17 now, so obviously it wasn't that long ago. But I wasn't really sure of what I wanted to do after I graduated high school, or even what I wanted to major in when I went to college, because I think that's such a crazy thing that a 16-year-old has to think about. But Delaney and I were actually in our school's politics club. And so I know that we were both active in politics and very opinionated about it. So I was kind of thinking of going into the realm of politics, which just so happens, I mean, pretty set forward for that path now. But yeah, I think that's where I kind of saw myself, but I was really unsure at the time.
And I can definitely say, before the shooting happened, I was in college as a political science major. And at the time, like Delaney and Sarah, like, of course, just, I think growing up where we grew up, you care about politics. You see, what's going on, like, on the news. And I think what the movement has kind of made us, kind of, the outcome of it has been is that instead of passively caring about politics, we've kind of been thrown into the forefront and we've had no other choice but to actively care and to actively mobilize. And for me, I knew that at that moment, what this kind of led me to is to really follow my passion, because while I was a political science major going to become a lawyer, I always knew that wasn't my path and how I wanted to be remembered in the world. And I think after everything happened, it kind of showed me that, like, life is too short and that I had to use my passion and follow my heart, because at the end of the day, after losing Joaquin, I knew that every single day he was alive. He was the one friend always telling people to, follow their dreams, and that kind of just shifted my life path and let me know that, like, I wanted to pursue the creative arts. I wanted to be a director. I wanted to design fashion. And, like, that's complete, like, these last 8 months, 9 months have completely 180'd my life. But the thing is like, I'm thankful for it, because I wouldn't want to be any other place, because I know that every day that I wake up with a purpose, and I wake up knowing that if I'm not changing the world for me, I'm changing the world for your kids, and then their kids, and then my kids. So I know that that is something that helps me sleep at night, and that's where my life has went.
So in less than a year since the shooting in Parkland, you have inspired and encouraged students from all over to join forces from all different backgrounds. Why did you think this book was necessary now? And we all probably know that answer, but say it, right?
People oftentimes, they'll come up to us and they'll call us superheroes, or like say something like, I don't know how you guys do it, this is insane, you guys are unstoppable. And yes, those are nice things to hear, but it's also important to remember that we're teenagers. We're teenagers doing this crazy huge thing, but we are still weird, dorky teenagers. Like, that is important to remember here, and that's what that book shows. It shows not just all the work that went into it, but the humanity. It shows who we are as human beings, and it really just shows that if we can do it, I mean, anybody can. Anybody can be an activist if a bunch of kids from Parkland can. It's just a matter of dedicating yourself, knowing what matters to you. And yeah, it's a strange book. There's a lot of incredible stories, but it truly captures each and every one of us in a way that is really necessary here, to show that this is a movement that is not about one broad message, but it is about every person in that movement too. It is about our feelings, it is about our emotions, it's about our stories, and this is a movement led by stories. And to have this physical collection of stories here for you all to read, to take in, I think is something that can be really impactful.
Exactly like Delaney said. Don't know how I'm going to follow that up. But, I think like Delaney said, it really brings kind of, because a lot of people see us in interviews and on TV kind of as like talking heads. And so this book really does show like the humanity in us, because obviously we are just like dorky teenagers who are just really into politics and legislation. But
we like teenage things too.
I promise. But I think this book, I mean, to be honest, this book shouldn't even have to exist. Yesterday, Delaney and I met a survivor from Virginia Tech, and her husband and her wrote a book about Virginia Tech. And she came up to us and she said, these books shouldn't have to exist, let's make sure another one doesn't have to be written. And I think that's so important to us. And in the book, like Delaney said, you can read all the different stories that we have to tell. And I think it's just so informative and it's so passionate, and it's really just out there to kind of help inspire the youth, because you read these stories and it's very grassroots. And you see how we were just completely normal teenagers, you know, going from like watching YouTube videos in our bedrooms to being on national television. And I think it just goes to show that like, if you put your mind to something, you could truly accomplish it. So I think that's a very important thing that this book shows.
Yeah, and also it's the fact that I think after the shooting happened, I think everyone remembers, just like anything in life, when something traumatic happens, you remember headlines, you remember certain events, and the show must go on. And I think you remember certain events just in blobs, but what the book allowed for us to convey was that we could tell the story in a linear fashion where it was every perspective. And I think what it did for us was, it was also a way, I think for me as well as Rick, it was almost therapeutic, because not only was I wasn't holding on to the story anymore, but now that this experience is something that I can share with you all. And also it's a way to kind of, I think it's a piece of history now, because while these books shouldn't have to exist, the sad reality of it, like, you know, what happened in Parkland did happen. So I think it was also a way of like us reclaiming the power and saying like, we want to be the first to tell our story and to have that, you know, that kind of piece of history to, you know, to exist forever. So I think the book was definitely super important to all of us, and it's crazy to see how it has progressed, because I remember when the idea was first, you know, thrown onto the table, and we probably spent hours deciding on what the name was, and like we'd get so close and we'd be like, no, I hate it, and we'd be like, oh my goodness. But I mean, it was, yeah, but
Every book meeting was like not about like the content, but it was about the title of the book.
Yeah.
Like that was the hardest part of writing this book.
Exactly.
Not kidding.
And I mean, but we got through it, and I'm just so thankful that we have this, you know, physical manifestation of what these past couple months have been, you know, several months have looked like.
That's great. Me and my co-author also know how that is about the title, as we went back and forth. But I want to, before I ask this next question, I just received your book last night, and everybody needs to get it. And I started reading it, and I was up pretty late. And so I just want to say, Cameron, in the first story, said something so profound that he realized like this was another flavor of the month mass shooting, you know? And I thought to myself, that is so true, right? This book is so needed and relevant, and you're right, it should never have to be another group of teenagers have to write another book, right? So this movement started with just a few friends and now has become a force to change the country. What was that first meeting like in Cameron's living room when you guys came up with this idea?
I mean, the way that Cameron like invited me to join, it was an interview that we had done together, because we all spoke at that same rally where Emma gave her famous We Call BS speech. Yay. But like David, Cameron, and I also spoke there. It was just nowhere near as impactful. But we did an interview together, and he literally walks up and he's like, Delaney, I'm inviting you to come to my house tonight, but I can't tell you why. Just come. And I was like, for how long? He's like, just come. And I was like, this is weird. Like, you know that, right? Like, that's a strange thing to say to a person, a teenage girl. And he was like, just come. So I came over, and then it turns out that there was this huge group of people sitting on a living room floor, and we just immediately jumped into it. We jumped into discussing our message, into discussing our communication, our legislation. And it was so rapid fire. There were so many different conversations happening, because we were in a way almost excited and relieved, I think, to be around other people that were grieving in the same way that we were. Because so much of the experience before that had been being around people who, even if they had shared the same experience as us, weren't going through it in the same way we were. And this was our chance to really just share our thoughts, our feelings in a way that would be received the right way, would turn into something more. And that was what that first meeting was. It was our chance to get out there and to become something more than a statistic, but it was also our chance, I think, to be ourselves for just a few minutes.
That was a little scary. It's okay. I remember I was invited to Cameron's house, I think a day after Delaney was. I was invited by my dearest friend, Jacqueline Corn, who at the time I wasn't even really good friends with. And I remember there was this whole like kind of interview thing going on at this park that was close to our school, and there was like so many interviewers there, and so I went just to kind of like get the vibe of it. And then I met Jacqueline there, and she said, hey, I've seen your tweets, because before that, a couple of my tweets had gone viral about the situation. And so she goes, I've seen your tweets, you should come to Cameron's house tonight. And like Delaney, I was like, why? I was like, what's going on at Cameron's house? And she was like, no, just come and you'll see. And I was like, okay, strange, but I'll do it. And so I remember I walked in, and it's how I would picture a frat house to look like, because there were 25 teenagers sitting down on a carpeted floor, and there were empty pizza boxes, there was trash everywhere, and there was like coffee everywhere just because no one had slept. And I remember I walked in, like there was at least like 10 different people on phone calls, scheduling interviews. There was like a whole whiteboard of like each interview that each person was gonna do the next day. So I was like, this is crazy. This is like almost like walking into like a startup business. Like this is incredible. And so then from there, like Delaney said, we started strategizing. And we ended up meeting, I think, every single day for like a month straight. And that's kind of how March for Our Lives was born. It was very grassroots. Like I think as grassroots as it gets, to 25 teenagers sitting on a living room floor. And I just remember that it's so vivid in my memory, even though it just happened a little while ago. But it's honestly one of the craziest things I've ever walked into, but I'm also so thankful that I did end up going to Cameron's house, even though I had no information on what we were gonna do.
Yeah, ladies, please don't just go to a guy's house if he says come over, but I can't tell you why. Don't do that.
No, don't. This was a special situation, but in general, don't do that.
So I didn't get invited to Cameron's house. I didn't get invited to Cameron's house until I think it was about 2 weeks in. And disclaimer, I never showed up until the march. That's like I knew that I had to do something, because I think after everything happened, like just everyone has different ways of coping with everything. And being a college student, trying to pass 5 classes, losing your best friend, life was a little sticky at that point. And I remember Matt Deitch, which was our chief strategist. He comes to like my garage, and that was we used to call that the lab, because like we just make t-shirts. And I remember he had a spot where he was going to San Francisco to do a town hall with Steve Kerr, and he said like, I need a shirt right now. It has to say "Stop Gun Violence," and I was like, okay, to the point. I like it. And it should get the message across. And he walks up and he said like, you need to do this, like you have to be a part of this. And I'm just like, yeah, like I think I am being a part of this right now. Like I just gave you this t-shirt, like this is my contribution. And then fast forward a little bit after just visiting the office and then meeting everyone, and out just seeing like the power and the energy of everything. And just cause like, at that point in time, like there was so much going on, and like, there was no way like what you were doing here wasn't connected to what someone was doing over there. And I don't think this is not very Sorry, I guess this might not. Thank you. I'm sorry, did anyone catch what I was saying? All right, thank you. So basically, everyone was just connected in some way. And then March 24th happens, and I can never, recreate that feeling, in Washington, D.C., but something in me was just like, something told me, it was like, drop everything, like, this is where you belong, these are your people, like, this issue is more important than whatever's going on at that moment, because, people died, for this, not for it, but people died in result, and then this is what happened. So I just knew that after that, and seeing, hearing about the conversations of Cameron's living room floor, like something bubbled, like how they say everything that went wrong, but like I think in this situation, everything that needed to go right ended up going, right.
Thank you. Is my next? So I'm going to ask you this question, but I first have to say the Women's March. So my co-author, Linda Beckstrom, and I actually attended and took this long journey to Washington, D.C. to be a part of the Women's March on D.C. that, sparked that movement. How did the Women's March affect how the March for Our Lives shaped?
The Women's March
Mine is.
Next time we'll
I have
bring
the best
batteries.
luck with microphones. Okay, I'll answer because my microphone's the only one that's working. No, I think, like I said earlier, when we were on Cameron's living room floor, kind of like bouncing ideas off of each other, and we decided we wanted to have a march because we thought that was one of the best ways to really show how many people care about this movement, because it's people actually showing up to something and you truly see the impact that this has on America. And so we kind of used the Women's March as an example, or as a, I guess, like a blueprint exactly of what we wanted March for Our Lives to be like. Because at the moment, obviously the Women's March was huge. It was the talk of the year. And so we were like, we could do this, but we could do this for a different issue. Even though I think that a lot of these issues kind of merge together in a way. And so that's how March for Our Lives was born. We were like, I remember it was a month before we wanted to do it, and we were like, we want to have a march on Washington, D.C. in a month. And they were like, that's not possible. And we were like, we don't care. We're going to try to do it anyway. And it was a crazy month, to say the least. People were literally working, I think, to the point, like 17-hour days to try to get this to happen. It was round the clock, nonstop. It was crazy, because no one's ever heard of, organizing this massive march on the Capitol in a month. And shout out to the mayor of DC for being really, I guess, cooperative with us, because I think any other mayor would be like, you're crazy, but she was really cooperative with us. No, it works. It works. But yeah, I would say that the Women's March was almost like a blueprint to us for the March for Our Lives.
Yeah, I think the Women's March kind of showed us that that's possible, that you can do this massive march. And don't get me wrong, obviously they've been done before. I mean, you look at the anti-war protests, the civil rights protests, but in recent years, I think the Women's March is really what stands out as an example of civic engagement, truly. And that form of civic engagement, ooh, yes, applause for civic engagement! I think that form of civic engagement, being able to really utilize the passion of a group of people but turn it into an action, was something that felt natural. It felt right, and it was something that we knew was possible because the Women's March had already done it. And I mean, if they can do it, why can't we in a month? Like Sarah said, don't organize a march in a month. It's not enough time, just a clarifier. But it very much, it showed, I think, the Women's March, I think the March for Our Lives, and every march that has followed that has shown that if you're not happy with what's going on, do something about it. Don't just sit there and complain. Don't sit in the comfort of your own home and watch the news cycle and be dissatisfied. Take that dissatisfaction, take that passion, and go march. Go vote. Go lobby. Do whatever you can. And the fact that that was becoming a norm, that for us we thought, okay, what do we do to channel our rage? Let's do a march. The fact that that was a thought that we were able to have because of the examples before us, because of the Women's March, is something that I feel incredibly blessed to be a part of, but also that I think is just the right way for our country to be operating.
So tell us, all the audience and myself, were there other historical events similar to this or whatever that could have inspired you? Unfortunately, because this horrific tragedy happened, it's horrible, but.
I'm gonna give the mic to Jamal after, but I do wanna say that personally for me, I mean, every social change has really been pioneered by young people. You look at the anti-war movements, you look at the civil rights movements, you look at women's suffrage and equality, and all of this was led by young people. I mean, if I could have a dime for every older person that walked up to me and said, I marched in the 60s and I'm marching with you now, I would literally be a millionaire. I'm not kidding. And that, I think, is really incredible in itself, that we have these people who are active when they were younger, and they're just telling us, they're like, we are ready to pass the baton over to you because we're seeing the incredible work that you're doing. And so much of what we do is rooted in those movements. When you look at the civil rights movement, something that was so rooted in equality and nonviolence, I mean, some of our heroes, many of our heroes, are these older political figures, these activists from our past, because they showed us the tenets of exactly what our movement is about, what our lives are about. We want that peace, we want that equality, and the fact that other people have fought just to get us to a point where we can be here right now fighting for equality is incredible in itself, and I think it inspires us every day.
No, you're okay. The thing is, it's always scary having Delaney go before you because like you have this idea in your head and then she takes it. Now you have to start thinking. The wheels get turning. But I can say definitely like Delaney said. I remember one day David and I were sitting down and we were trying to analyze why our movement have been successful, because I think I would say like the social media era there have been many movements that have sprouted and not many have kind of stuck. And for us, we wanted to kind of figure that out and see what kind of tap into people's psyches. And then what we realized was, especially in regards to the anti-war movement, was that a big reason I think why so many people were galvanized to to mobilize and to speak out was the fact that they saw the amount of carnage every single night when they turned on the TV. They saw their friends, their brothers, their sisters, mothers, fathers being brought home in body bags, and I feel like there was no way to disconnect from what was happening around the world or across the world. And for us, I think the reason we've had this privilege to be this major movement was the idea that what happened to us was almost in that same effect where these were kids dying, and I think when parents and kids across the country saw that, they saw it as like that could be either me or my child. And I thought that was an idea that was too much to live with. And for us, when we realized that, when you looked at the civil rights movement, when you looked at the anti-war movement, you read about the figures or the leaders, like every decision they made it with like they made those decisions thinking like we had nothing to lose at this point in time, or in their time, like all the odds were stacked against them. So I think for us, it was realizing that like it's either we don't speak out and this cycle continues, or we do and we actually fight for change in this country. And for us, it's like I think it was super inspirational just to be in an environment where we could see people like Delaney or Sarah speak out and speak these beautiful words, and people were like, wow, where these kids learn to speak so well? And I think that like it was just this continuing kind of like echo chamber of just support and inspiration, because you saw that like this was attainable. Like we have people around us that are super talented, and I think it wasn't always just looking at movements for inspiration, but I think a lot of the time we found inspiration in one another, because I think just being an athlete, it's draining. Because after a while, it's like you put so much into the movement, you put so much into trying to change the world, and at one point you realize that there's not much for yourself, and that's oftentimes we always speak about self-care and what we're doing to take care of ourselves. But I think what's been so special about our movement is the idea that like we have been able to inspire each other, and then not only that, be connected with the young people across the country and draw inspiration from them. And I think that's what's been that's been the most inspiring about this, is because sometimes you just need to see someone do it to actually believe that it's attainable. And for us, it's just been this constant like, wow, you're doing something amazing. Now I want to do something amazing, and just continue that cycle. And for us, it's let's let us to be here, because we wouldn't be here without each and every single one of you. Whether it was donating, shedding tears, pulling up to marches, this wouldn't be our reality if we didn't have the constant love of support of America. Because this room right here is what America really looks like. This is what America should represent, where we have a country of people who are empathetic towards their neighbors. And I think that's what helps sustain and inspire our movement, really, because we saw that people cared. And I know, as I know, sometimes that's all that matters, just to know someone cares.
I think Delaney and Jamal took every thought I had in my head and expressed it to you all, so I'll leave it at that. I don't think there's much else to say about it, but yeah.
Thank you. You guys are really the best. You're inspiring me like crazy right this second. So shortly after the shooting, 100 teens traveled from Parkland to Tallahassee for a 2-day lobby trip, right? So tell us, what did you learn in those 2 days?
So I was actually on that trip, and I'd like to shout out again.
Yay.
Thank you. I would actually like to shout out Miss Jacqueline Korn because her little 17-year-old body organized that trip in 2 days. She organized that entire trip almost by herself in 2 days, which is, I watched her do it, and I still don't understand how she did it. But that trip was actually so incredibly inspiring and amazing. I think it was so empowering too, because we opened up the trip to anyone at Douglas who wanted to go. And obviously there was limited spots, there was only 100 seats, we had 3 buses. And I remember maybe Jacqueline put it on her Instagram, I put it on mine. Maybe I think it was 24 hours later, all the spots were taken. Which just goes to show how involved people really were in this, and how, even though it was so soon afterwards, how they really wanted to go out there and tell our politicians face to face what they witnessed and what they think needs to change. And so I remember we got there and we actually stayed at that FSU's campus, because FSU is right there in Tallahassee. And we split up into groups, and I remember there was maybe around 6 people per group, and we actually were scheduled to meet with, I think, 5 different politicians that day, different meetings. And from my experience, what we learned was that a lot of the politicians were late to our meetings, some didn't even show up, and I remember another group, one of the people that they were supposed to meet with, a politician, didn't even show up, and the reason why they were given that this person didn't show up was because that person wasn't a morning person. They completely missed a meeting with survivors of a mass shooting not even a week ago because they couldn't get up in the morning, which I think just really goes to show how our politics, or some of our politicians, don't really care about us. So during that time, we had meetings with different politicians, and they would ask us, what do you think has to change? And we would tell them our opinions. We would tell them some of the policy points that we wanted, like funding for the CDC, which is a very easy one to pass, I would hope so. And we would just tell them our opinions, what school was like that day, what we think needed to change about our school. And during those meetings, a lot of the politicians, I guess, pretended to listen. None of them wrote anything down, except for one lady. But it was very kind of disheartening. And then I remember at the very end of the day, we got to meet with Rick Scott, who is the governor of Florida. And he met, yeah, not for long, that's true. Someone's gonna be the new governor. But I remember we met, since there was such a large group of us, he met with, we were split up into 2 groups, and he met with each group at a different time. And I was in the second group that he met with. And so it was a bunch of us sitting, kind of like a round table discussion, and he was just sitting over there with his secretaries next to him. And he just kind of sat there, looked at us, listened, didn't take any notes. I don't think I remember seeing anyone write anything down. And it was just people in that room who were in that building where the shooting occurred, just pouring out their stories and crying there. And it was so emotional and so heart-wrenching. And just to see that he didn't care. Like, it was so obvious. It was really difficult, I think, for us to see, but it was also empowering to us, because it really kind of empowered us to move forward with this, because we were like, these politicians obviously don't care about us. What are we going to do to change it? We're going to vote them out this midterms, November 6th. So the bus ride home was kind of, not necessarily dull, but it was more of like disheartening, because we really did get to see the true side of politics. But like I said, it empowered us, and it empowered so many other groups in our school to move forward with this too, not just March for Our Lives, but for example, Change the Ref, which is an amazing organization, and so many others. And so Tallahassee was so important in the fact that we truly got to see how politics works and how politicians actually view us.
So I gave a speech in Tallahassee. Yeah, but there's like a little bit of backstory to that I don't often talk about because the Tallahassee trip happened obviously very quickly, as Sarah expressed, and I remember DMing Jackie and being like, please, can I like come to this thing? Like, I'm just a sad girl, let me go. And she did, and I was really excited, but then we got there at like 3 in the morning, I think, and Jackie walks up to me and she goes, so I need you to write a 7-minute speech for a press conference tomorrow morning. And I was like, excuse me? So I promptly had an emotional breakdown and didn't write the speech. It's fine. And then we went into these meetings all day, and the entire time I'm like, oh my God, I have a speech in a few hours, and I just haven't written a single thing down. And pretty much what happened in those meetings was, like Sarah said, fake listening, where they go, yes, I understand, I'm so sorry that you guys had to go through this, I feel for you. And we're like, great, that's awesome that you feel for us and that you're sorry, but what are you gonna do now? And a lot of the time we were met with a resounding nothing. An implied nothing, of course, but still, nothing. And the more that we heard that, the more that we were in these meetings where people were showing up late because they weren't mourning people, or where we just weren't being listened to, or where they weren't answering our questions, the angrier I got, and the more I realized, this trip is just showing me what I need to change. This trip is just showing me exactly what's wrong with politics right now. So I went out there with the few notes that I had, the policy points, and the little bit of documentation from the day, and I just I went ham on that press conference. Like, I was like, all right, I'm not gonna hold back for anything, because there's no point in letting these people get away with what they're doing right now or what they're not doing right now. So I gave this speech where I basically railed on every single politician that we had met. I was literally like shaking with anger afterwards, and I was just like, all right, well, I don't know what's gonna come out of that. I didn't even get to meet Rick Scott, who I like to call Voldemort personally, because it's just like a striking resemblance in a lot of different ways between the two. So I didn't even meet with Voldemort because I had to go back to Parkland for the CNN town hall, but I remember like the next day, my mom was like, oh yeah, I found your speech on Facebook, as moms often do. No hate to the moms. I love how much you use Facebook. It was just, that was where she got it. She was like, I found your speech on Facebook, and I was like, oh cool, and it had like 10 million views already, and I was like, what? And it turns out that people actually really wanted to hear what we had to say in like a genuine way. They didn't want to hear the pre-prepared press releases from elected officials or just, people in the system. They wanted to hear the actual, true, genuine experiences that we were having, and they were not good experiences. And the more that people heard about it, the more that people saw the corruption that we were facing, saw the apathy that we were facing, I think the more people got angry. For me, that was a trip that, yeah, disheartened me, but just encouraged me to vote for better people, to get other people to vote for better elected officials, because that's what this is about. This is about voting people into office that aren't gonna be that way, that aren't gonna pretend to listen, but are going to actually take what you have to say into consideration because they're representing you. That was what I learned. I learned in that trip not the power of politicians, but the power of people. And that is what I'm learning every single day.
That's a hard one to follow, Jamal.
I wasn't gonna follow it. I'm just getting ready for the next question. I think my friends here have just frankly covered everything that was needed to say about that. And plus, I wasn't on that trip.
Okay, so this is, the audience. Okay, so, to open this to the audience for questions, and then she's going to walk around. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Edie. I'm a senior at New Trier High School in Winnetka. It's a northern suburb of Chicago. And I'm a co-president of the branch of Amnesty International Club at our school, and we focused on gun control last year. And into this first semester. And we have a pretty large school, so we had over 1,000 kids walk out last year on our fields, and we had our student government working with it. And I had a question about how do I mobilize peers? Where I live, everyone's very educated about these issues. They know the facts, they're not ignorant, but yet they still seem to conflict with what we're going for and like what we are trying to change. And so right now we're focusing on contacting Rauner, urging him to sign Bill SB 337, because the Senate and the House have actually, it's basically common sense gun laws about like storage, and like I shouldn't be allowed to make my own gun store, you know, like I should probably have a background check. So how do I connect with peers and really educate them? I'm just feeling like I'm hitting a wall with a lot of my peers right now.
I think that's a good question, and that's a question I think we hear quite often due to the fact that, I mean, just I think living in a community and knowing exactly what's going on in the world, and I think you kind of expect everyone else to, you know, see the severity of the situation. But I think a lot of the time when people are educated enough to know what's going on and still not taking any action, I think that's the epitome of privilege, because at the end of the day, it's at the end of the day, I think being black in America, I have no other choice but to vote, to be outspoken, because I think every day out in the world, I've just been, wouldn't say dealt those cards, but that's the reality that I have to face, because time and time again, if you look in underserved communities, you know, most of them vote blue, and time again, you realize that it's not a red or blue thing. It's the reality of voting people who represent their constituents. And for me, it's like when I'm speaking to my peers, I always just love to say, in this political system, I think it's like we've built this system where we're very reactive. We see the injustice in the world, and we love to react to it. But I always love to say, like, I think in order to change the system and to see the change we need to be proactive rather than reactive, because at the end of the day, we need to be empathetic towards our neighbors. We have to care about them as if they were ourselves. Because in this world, when you do not stand against the injustices of the world, you feed into the system that is already corrupting it. And I would just say to my friends and my counterparts, I say, like, you have to voice your opinion, you have to use your vote before it's too late, because as we can see, our democratic system is being pulled right from us before our eyes. And it is naive to say that it isn't. So I would just say, to put it in plain terms, is to find, I think what's worked for us is to find different ways to push that message, and to also realize that there are people who are willing to give to this cause, and people who are willing to mobilize. And I think it's a lot of time it's focusing on them, because for us it wasn't trying to garner 100 people to mobilize with us. It was realizing that, like, we had a strong core of people who did care, and to focus that energy and to fight for change. Because at the end of the day, I think when you stand on the side of justice, the universe starts to work with you. So I would just say, just keep doing what you're doing, because it sounds like you're really involved in your school. You obviously know what you're talking about, and to continue that energy forward, because I really think, like, you are a leader. So continue to lead by example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, just to go off of what you were saying and your question, actually one of my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quotes is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I think that's so important to remember, especially because over the summer we were on our Road to Change tour, where we stopped at every single congressional district in Florida and went all around the country. And we were greeted with protesters, as we often are, exactly. And what we did actually was, instead of kind of secluding ourselves from them, we went up to them and we had conversations. And we came to find out that our protesters actually agree with us on a lot of things. For example, universal background checks. 97% of Americans agree on universal background checks, which is crazy because it's not even a law that's been passed yet, which just goes to show how corrupt politicians can be, because they're bought by certain interest groups. For example, the NRA. And so I think even though this kind of sounds like maybe a lame answer, but I think it's more of just walking up to them, having this conversation and educating them on the things that you might agree on, rather than things that you disagree on. And kind of just finding a common ground, because there's no use in arguing something that you know you can't change their mind on. So that's what I would say. Yes.
Most specifically, I would say people oftentimes connect more with stories than they do statistics. And I think that that's something that our country has a big problem with, is we become desensitized to these statistics. I mean, that's something that was our biggest concern, as we talked about going into this, was that we don't want to be another number. And even if people know the facts, they may not necessarily connect with it because they don't know the stories. They don't know the human side of it. And when you expose them to the stories, when you expose them to the reality of other people's lives, people find a lot more to connect to. It's a lot easier to ignore things when you're not seeing that side of it, when you're only seeing the numbers that are the polls, the things that are displayed on the news, rather than actually communicating the way that this affects people on a daily basis. And I think that when they understand the severity of it and really just how much it can affect you, I think that's when it can be most effective. But I think Jamal really just nailed it. So I'm just gonna applause for Jamal and applause for wearing the QR code hoodie. Hell yes.
Hi, I'm Joseph Marco. I'm an 8th grader at Skinner North, and I co-lead our activist group. Our group has attended many rallies, such as the St. Sabina rally that happened in March, last June, June. And while our school is very educated, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name. Her school is, there are many kids or activists in our school who really haven't found their voice and don't have the courage to, speak out against these certain issues. And also, we're planning on actually holding an assembly to find your voice, speak your mind, and everything. Before this happens, I was just going to ask, are there any advice you would say to students who don't have enough courage to speak their mind and have their voice?
There seems to be, this is a very good question, there seems to be this culture around activism and how there's only one way that you can do it, and that's by giving speeches and leading giant rallies and leading marches. And yes, that is all valuable, but there are so many different things that go into activism. You have the creative aspects, you have the organizational aspects, and these are all incredibly valid channels to pursue social change. And really, activism is about collaboration. It's about coming together with these people who may not necessarily have that voice, that loud and proud public speaking voice, but have other skills that they can bring to the table, and collaborating with them. Finding each person who can contribute something to the cause, really. And once we open up that definition of activism, we show people that finding your voice is not just about shouting, it's about doing too. And I think if we can really express that, people will feel more open.
I really believe that activism is community. And for me, I can just, take this testimony as you please, but before everything, I think before this summer, especially with the Road to Change, there was no one role. Everyone did a bit of everything, whether someone was taking pictures, someone was moderating, someone was actually a panelist. And for me, I went into the summer thinking that I'd only be contributing to this cause from the creative aspect. And not only, I think what activism has helped me with, it's helped me find my voice in a way where I've had the support of my friends to be like, yo, you can do this. And even if it is not your strong point at that moment in time, there's always room to grow and there's always room to improve. And for me, it's kind of broken that shell, and it's been super inspirational, because while I wouldn't say I was the worst public speaker, I wasn't the person that was gonna walk up and cry on live TV, or I wasn't the one. I wasn't a tearjerker with the words, but what it did for me was it helped me realize that I could contribute to this cause in many ways, whether it was designing T-shirts, whether it was creating graphics, whether it was creating video, or sitting here on this panel, or writing a book. And I think for the friends who haven't found their voice yet, I would say it comes.
it comes in a way where when it's natural. Because I knew that I was growing when I was doing my first panel, and it's this weird thing. You hear these words, your brain connects with your mouth, and you say these words, and next thing you know, the whole room's applauding, and then one time's like, I'm not too bad, am I? And I think that that's a really liberating moment, and it's creating opportunities for your friends and your peers to have those moments to really feel good about them and themselves and their skills, and to realize that just because you aren't where you want to be at this point in time, that doesn't mean you'll never get there. But I think from what you've said, you are doing that, especially with the assembly that you're planning. So I think with a lot of young people who are aligned with this movement, you guys are a lot of y'all are on the right track. So it's just a lot of his belief, and just to know that, especially from the March for Our Lives family, like, we are here with you, and we are a team in this, in this fight. So yeah.
I think Delaney and Jamal pretty much hit the nail on the head with that one. But like Jamal, I actually hated public speaking before all this happened. I was not into it. I hated it, I really did. I would almost pass out having to speak in front of my class for a presentation. And then then I had to give a speech in front of 1 million people, literally 1 million people. And whew. Like Jamal said, doing my very first panel, I've come to really find myself in it. And I realized that what I'm saying always comes from the heart, and that it's what I truly believe in, because I truly do believe in this cause, and I believe in everything that March for Our Lives is doing, and so many other groups. And if I just, stick to what I believe in and stick to my facts that I know, that I do have a voice in this, because even if you don't think anyone's listening, you still do have a voice, and you're saying something. And sometimes you don't think anyone's listening, but they really are. I didn't think anyone was going to listen to my tweet that went viral, but apparently people were. And so I think it's just realizing what you're most passionate in and finding your voice in that.
I think we should call it activism puberty, but that's just me. I'm just putting that out.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, this lady right here has had her hand up from the beginning, all the way in the front
Please.
on the right.
Let her
Please
arm
let her.
rest.
We have 2 more, so we'll do
Okay,
one, 2.
okay.
You can put your hand down. We'll keep an eye out for you.
We got you, don't worry.
I got you.
Hi. In my school recently, we've been learning about the voting process and different opinions on how our country should be run. And I really expected that me and my classmates would argue a lot. We'd get really angry at each other, we'd yell, we'd get sent to detention. And it turned out that none of that happened. We managed to talk civilly about topics that are very important to us, that we had very different beliefs on. And your stories about how politicians refuse to listen in the first place, aside from them kind of being jerks at times, why do you think they'd be led to believe that there is no way they can talk civilly about these topics when their job is to convey all of our opinions and make sure that they're turned into actions?
I love you. That was great. And honestly, it's amazing what a group of teenagers can figure out in just one conversation, but our elected officials don't want us to know and have literally kept from us for decades. I mean, think about it. The reason that we don't seem to realize that simple discussion can solve so many issues and reach this common ground is because they don't want us to know that. They don't want us to reach that common ground because the goal of so many elected officials, of so many hateful groups, is to divide us, is to split us apart in this bickering, in this misperception, so that we are not able to create that common ground, to create that healthy, helpful discussion. And really, like I've said so many times before, this is about people. The fact that your class had that conversation and realized we may not agree on things, but we can reach common ground, we can be civil, that is the future of our country, and I firmly believe that.
I'm so sorry, but would you guys hate me if I went to the bathroom really quick? I honestly think my bladder's fragile, so Jamal's gone.
Yeah, Delaney, you hit that on the head. Especially with the current administration or just the state of politics, the strategy is to divide and conquer. And first off, how old are you? 13. And I can say for a fact, when I was 13, I don't think I could be that civil with how I felt about politics. But that just goes to tell you that the younger generation, and like I firmly believe that you're just purely more brilliant than I was when I was 13, and I can admit that because I think not only with with more access to information and knowledge, you understand how you are at an age where you're understanding how the world works at just an earlier age than most of the world. And I think there's so much power in that. So the idea that at 13, especially, that at that age, just hormones and chemicals in your brain, everything's flying around. I would expect, the conversation to, not be civil, but it's, I think I really applaud you that you and your classmates came to that, conclusion to know that we can, come to common ground if we just talk it out. And I remember we were in North Dakota and we met with the young Republicans of the state, and it was a state rep, the president of the Young Republicans, and a gun owner. And at that time, we had a town hall that day, and the city of Bismarck, they organized a protest, and the protest was endorsed by the mayor of Bismarck, North Dakota, the counter protest to our town hall. So we got word of that, and we set up a meeting at a local Starbucks. And basically we sat down, we started going through our policy points. We were like, 1, 2, I agree with that, I agree with that, I agree with that. And then there was I think one where they just didn't, we just couldn't, come to the middle on. And then we sat there, and then the first word at the end of the conversation that they said was wow, I'm surprised that we actually agreed on more things than we disagreed on. And that's what you'll realize with people across, in this country, is that when you actually can have a conversation, and you can, when you can kind of pick at someone's brain, you realize that you're not as divided as you think you are. Because at the end of the day, when we had counter protests at all our events, oftentimes you'll see in politics why people are mad is because people just feel unheard. So when you create a space and environment where each party can be heard, I think that's where progress is. Because progress is always, it's never when you lean too far left or when you lean too far right. I think progress is in the middle, because I think that's where the most growth is. So once again, thank you in your class for being leaders in that regard. Because like I said, even now sometimes if there's sometimes it's hard to be to hear some things, because oftentimes especially in politics, I believe everyone is entitled to their opinion, but I firmly believe in fact-based opinions, because just in this world, in this work you'll realize that not many people are rooted in reality, and just in this. No, I'm telling you, we were in South Carolina, and then we were talking to a counter protester, and then our friend was like, kids are dying every day, and he said to my friend, he said, prove it. And that, it's you when I said I wasn't witness to it, I just heard the story, and my jaw dropped, because I just couldn't comprehend that someone would actually not only treat a young person like that, but believe that this isn't the reality of our all right, let's not start on that. But exactly. But once again, I applaud you, and to just continue to keep it going. And now, like I said, I have faith in you all. I have faith in the young generation to know that not only are we going to fix this problem, but the generations behind us are going to fix this problem. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to take bashing every politician, until we vote them all out. I think it's going to take a cultural shift where we create a voter force of young people who care about each other, and a voter force of young people that it's inherent to vote. Because especially in if you look at countries that lowered the voting age to 16 per se, especially Brazil. We've seen that not only has their total number of registered voters gone up, but the amount of people who've actually voted have gone up because people, I think young people are being introduced to politics at a younger age, and I think that's where that's where the power is. So I hope you run for president because you are already handling the war room. So thank you again.
We have one more question. Thank you. Hi, I'm Brenna with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming to Chicago. You all are part of the lockdown generation, and you've grown up with these active shooter drills all the time. And they tell us they're normal now. They're like a fire drill. But my glimmer of hope is that these active shooter drills will go away just like the duck and cover drills from before. So can you kind of talk to us about, do you feel like that was just a normal thing, or psychologically, emotionally, what has that affected you guys?
Yeah, I got you. I'll just keep it short. The first time I remember doing an active shooter drill was my junior year of high school. And at the time, just to let you know, I saw no significance in that. I said, no, this would never be my reality. There's no way this could happen to me until February 14th when, I get a text message from my friends saying, shots fired at Douglas, and then not only seeing the text message, but opening Snapchat and seeing the carnage, the blood, and the screaming. And I think what was crazy about that was there was a story that, because I played basketball for Douglas, and there was a story that I remember, and I think I may have suppressed this for a while, but it was about around my first week at the school, and I was at practice, and the shooter, and he walked up to my friends and I, and he showed us a backpack full of bullets. And at this time, I just see that, I'm just like, okay, this kid's, he's weird, he's crazy. But at the time, it goes to show you, if I saw that now, I would make sure that everything is done to make sure that person not only doesn't have access to a gun, but doesn't have access to anything that has to do with the gun. That person gets the proper care that they need. And I think it's a great question when you ask the psychological effects it had, because I think before it happened to us, there was just no way that our brains could, prepare or make that connection, because, I think it's almost human to just not care about something until you're, knee deep. But I just know that. I just know I do believe in a time where that's not the reality for the young people of America, because now more than ever, that's something that, because I remember when the active shooter drills were being implemented in schools, it wasn't every school that did active shooter drills, because I transferred from a school called Piper High School, which is about 20 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's about 20 minutes south, and it's, in a more lower income neighborhood, and we never did active shooter drills, and it was just that, taking that step, I said, it was, we were so disconnected from that reality that when it actually did happen, it kind of, we thought to ourselves, wow, if I took it more seriously, maybe there could have been something, I could have done something to, change the outcome.
Not even 2 weeks before the shooting at our school, we reformed our lockdown drill. The Code Red system, they spent an entire day in school going over basically what the new protocol was, what we needed to do in every situation. And I remember having conversations with my mom, not even 2 weeks before the shooting, about where I would hide if we got shot up during my school lunch where I ate outside. Would I hide in trash cans? Would I go for a bathroom stall? I remember I talked to my mom about how I needed to start putting the car keys in my pocket when I went to the bathroom in case I needed to go and hide in the trunk of my car during a shooting. I even stopped wearing heels to school, which for me This is a big deal. Because I knew that I needed to be able to run in case the situation called for it. And I guess I lived in a different scenario than most because I viewed it as not just a possibility, but as an inevitability. Because I had seen what happened in the news, and I knew that the more that we talked about this, the more that I needed to treat it like a real situation, the more I needed to be wary of where I was, what I was doing in school, which isn't the way that any student should live, but it was the way that I lived. And I know now that my 13-year-old sister lives the exact same way as me. My 13-year-old sister is so desensitized that she doesn't realize the significance of these lockdowns. She doesn't realize that it's not normal or okay to have to hide in a bathroom because there's a robbery at the 7-Eleven near her school. That is not a reality that any student should live in. It's one that I've lived in for so long. It's one that my younger sister is growing up in right now, and that is not okay with me, and it will never be okay with me. I dedicate every day of my life to keep that from being reality.
So I was born in 2001, and obviously Columbine happened in 1999. And so I kind of like to say that, I mean, most of us were born into the mass shooter generation, because that's the truth of it. We were born into knowing that mass shootings were a thing, and that they did happen at schools. And I remember after Sandy Hook, I was in 6th grade when Sandy Hook happened. I remember, I think that was the first time I really had an active shooter drill at my school, at my middle school, which actually happens to be right next to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And I remember I was 11 in 6th grade. No 11-year-old should have to process why they're hiding in a closet with 20 of their other students, or peers. And I think living in Parkland, especially Parkland being one of the safest cities in Florida, we kind of lived in a bubble where we thought this could never happen to us. We live in a suburban, white, affluent neighborhood. Like, what could go wrong here? Unfortunately, a lot. But I remember just, I guess, growing up in the mass shooting generation, that I never thought it could happen to me until it did. And so, like you said, with the kind of, I guess, the psychological approach behind it and what it really does to upcoming generations, because what we're trying to push at March for Our Lives is preventable measures. I know a huge argument has been arming teachers, but that's just saying that a school shooting is inevitable, and that's going to happen. We want to do things that are going to stop a school shooter from getting a gun in the first place, or anyone who has violent intentions. And I think a lot of the policies and legislation that's being talked about and being passed at the moment is not a preventative. It's just, it's more of it's treating shootings as an inevitable, as that they're going to happen. I think that's just a horrible reality to have to raise your kids in. It's a reality where you're saying, I know you don't want to do these drills, but you're going to have to do them because it could happen to you. And that's what we're trying to change at March for Our Lives, and not just for school shootings, but for shootings that happen every single day in so many different neighborhoods and places, in movie theaters, in shopping malls, in nightclubs. I remember when Pulse happened. Pulse happened, I think, when I was in 10th grade, maybe 9th grade, summer going into 10th grade. And Pulse was just 3 hours away from Parkland. It was really close, and especially being a member of the LGBTQ community, it really hit me hard. And I think that's when I really stepped into gun reform and looking into it. And I think that's when I finally realized this is very well a possibility. This only happened 3 hours away from my home. This could happen to me. And to have to watch other kids experience the same things that I did, and to meet other kids who have lived through school shootings, it's really disheartening because you're now a part of this community that can never go back to the way they were. And so we're just trying to make sure that no other community has to feel the same way as we do.
So if everyone could just give one more really loud round of applause.